Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, your queer femme poly kitchen witch and proud geek. Today's topic is death, dying, and grief.
Wah wah.
Whew, wow, that's a heavy one. So why do we need to talk about this? Why do we need to talk about death and dying and grief, especially in the aspect of magic related to them?
I think because our initial response to the idea is that it's heavy. First of all, if you're listening to this, thank you, because this is a topic that not everybody wants to lean into. That's your right. You know, we are on this path of life, and if you want to ignore the death cycle part of it, well, it's still going to catch up with you one way or another.
Yes, no one gets out of this alive.
Or without losing people, things, you know. So it is a reality. It is something, it is a part of life. It is the other half of life. It is the balance. It is part of the cycle. It is part of the pattern. And I lean in. I think there's the magic to it because one of the most beautiful, deeply human experiences on this earth. And I don't think it would exist if not for the existence of love and life.
Why are we talking about this now? Well, because we're approaching Samhain, and Samhain is the start of the wheel of the year. It is that area and time,
which is New Year.
which is New Year. The veil is thinnest, and you are the closest to your ancestors at this time. And not just on a pagan path, it comes across so many different religions, spiritual paths,
Yep.
everything around that October 30th to about November 2nd. There's a lot of overlap that deals with topics arranging around the dead.
And honestly, on through winter, because in the deepest part of our ancestries of the human species that has long survived prior to human technology of heaters and air conditioners, surviving the winter, you know, itself is a feat and a challenge. And so death and grief, it's very visits, it dwells in us and around us at this time of year. And I think different cultures and spiritual paths have learned ways to honor that. But I also think it's deeply embedded in the natural cycles of, and of course, that this is saying for us because we're on the northern hemisphere, because
Right.
we're experiencing fall and into winter. But of course, there are the southern hemisphere folk who have swap cycles.
Right.
Yeah, which I always love to think about because then it's macrocosm and microcosm.
And for them, even in the summertime, though, there's the flip cycle of that with Beltane, which would be the flip side of Samhain. You're still life, it comes from death. So it's that
Yeah.
cycle of beginning, and the seed of life is nurtured by the compost around it, which is the realm of death. So it still fits in a lot of ways, even if you're on the southern side versus the northern side where we are here.
Yeah. So I think it's a beautiful topic, honestly. It's one that I'm very passionate about. It's one that, you know, I'm experienced in. And I think that you don't get past a certain point in life without having some kind of experience in death, dying, and or grief.
And I want to talk about something that grief is not always just about people.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about grief
death.
and most death or death and everything else. You can absolutely grieve pets. You can grieve losing a job. You can grieve about the state of the world, which, whew, that's a whole other topic.
I'm sure many of us are. I was just saying that I feel like right now my life feels like in every aspect of my life, I am experiencing entering the spiraling staircase down to the underworld. And I just see that in the world around us, that being in the 9 year overall, 2025 numerologically adds up to a 9. And I know we've talked about that, but being in that, I can feel the blanket of that settling over the world. In everything I just see around me and in my personal life. And all I can do is lean in.
Yeah. And in that leaning in, I think you realize that because it is a cycle and it's a feeling and emotion, we're talking about grief, there's no one way that it happens, right? It's going to be different.
It's not just sadness. So people in grief are like, well, I'm not sad. This is weird. I'm not sad. Well, grief isn't just sadness. You know, it can be numbness. It's complicated, right? It's got it's got a lot of aspects to it. It could be very, it's an umbrella of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's a big thing culturally where we've talked about the stages of grief and whether or not that was a study on this, that, or the other thing on, grieving family and or grieving that you are nearing the end of your own life, sort of thing. But let's just say that it's not a linear process and there are no goalposts. There's no
No.
graduation.
No, it's something that just keeps happening.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like it's like an archetype that sits with you, like it's a friend. Grief.
To me, the best visual interpretation of grief that I ever saw or thought was grief is a ball in a box and it's bouncing. And each time it hits a side of the box, you feel one of the stages of grief: anger, bargaining, acceptance, frustration, all of that, different things, sadness, all of
Denial.
that, denial, all of it. The thing is, over time, at first, it's hitting sides all the time. If it's a big ball in a small box, it's going to hit everything constantly. Over time, that ball shrinks. So it's going to hit a wall less often, but it's still going to hit something that triggers it. And that ball never, ever fully goes away. It just sometimes takes a lot longer to hit something that triggers that grief emotion.
You say the ball shrinks, but I want to wager that the box gets bigger.
Probably a little bit of both.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah. Either way, it's different for everyone. I'll still find things that I grieve over the loss of my father when I was 4, and I'm 48, almost going to be 49. And there'll still be something that triggers me that's 44 years ago. I mean, seriously, you never know when it's going to hit. Now, it's not all the time anymore by any means or anything else, but there's just going to be something.
I think that's why I approach grief itself as like a friendly visitor of a spirit level. Like, grief comes in to sit with you at those moments and says, yeah, I know, I get it. That was significant to you. That meant something.
The thing is, it's not always a sad thing.
Right.
And that's the weirdness is you think grief is you think sadness, but sometimes it's
Relief.
There's a relief, especially if there was a lot of contention or someone was in a lot of pain.
Yeah. Release, like free from their pain, or release from having to see someone suffering. The other thing is, I know we mentioned other things that we can grieve, and I'm not sure if we mentioned relationships, like divorces, breakup, and that's a very real aspect of having a lot of emotions tied up in this ball of grief that have very many different strings, and how we manage our way through that can be either devastating or growthful, and sometimes even that is a blessing in disguise, or a release of tension. It's just sometimes it's necessary to let things end and let things go or transform, just not be what they once were, because that's just again a part of the cycle of life.
Yeah.
So I think in recognizing the importance of death, dying, and acknowledging our grief, being in relationship with our grief, I think it's magical to be willing to engage in the awareness of that and the meaning of all of that. I think that for me, that's where grief magic is, recognizing the connection or disconnection, that there's, so much wrapped up in, and how complicated it is, but it's also just so very human of us to have feelings around all of that.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that we're talking about it in this idea of what can we do as magic folk? What can we do as queer folk to look at the grief around us? Okay, so we know that it's going to happen, right? We know we're going to feel grief points in our life. Sometimes lesser, sometimes we're going to feel it intensely. Sometimes we'll just feel it in passing. Like if a beloved celebrity dies, you can feel it in passing. But there's going to be a lot of different shapes and shades and sizes to that. How does it relate in kind of that magical sense? We've talked about, again, the idea, you said, descending into Hades, into the underworld,
right,
and that shadow aspect of self. And it's one of those things that, have you ever experienced grief or death in dying in a magical way, in a way that does something that transcends the ordinary and into that kind of magical plane?
Many times. For me, the answer is very yes. But not just for me personally, but also for my community and for people, like you said, when there's a celebrity death, like it can be a community experience, a communal experience where a lot of
Hmm.
people are like, but I want to say it just makes me think of like one of my most specific forms of experiencing death and dying in a magical way was when our friend Raven Moon, who was a pillar in a queer, local queer magical community that I had very deep, fond feelings for, was dying from cancer. And I think, watching that whole process, obviously with hope that there would be like fighting and survival, and then you just kind of go through the process of learning that this is what takes him out. There's no, this is it, like, have you ever considered like facing that? I've never done personally, but I've loved people who have, and it's just sometimes people don't know that it's coming, and sometimes you get that
Hmm.
blessing where you do know death is coming. And so we had very magical moments from that point on where you knew that this was hospice level at life care, and being able to know him through that and then continue a relationship with him in spirit has been one of the most magical and deeply emotionally rewarding things that I could have gone through, although I would have gladly given all of that up to still have more time with him on this
Hmm.
earth. So bittersweet, but I was very much, when I visited Raven Moon in the hospital, he wrote, because he couldn't talk, he wrote a message. He would write messages to all of us, but mine was, and I took a picture and it always comes up as a memory, and it's, when I call on me for help, when I'm on the other side, I will have more hands to help. And that meant a lot to me.
Hmm.
And I took that to heart, and I remind people who loved him many times that I'm like, well, I think he's on the other side wanting to help us. So just ask,
Hmm.
like, reach out to him. He usually has a sassy response in some way, shape, or form. Likes to let himself know, there's little signs, his presence in spirit. And so I feel like a very solid relationship still exists
Hmm.
despite, and I think that is why it was so magical, is that we went into it knowing that we're going to continue loving each other, and
Hmm.
death is just part of the process and is not always a complete severance or a complete end. I think we, in honoring anybody's memory or treasuring something that didn't work out but taught you something, there's so much magic in that.
Hmm.
What about for you?
And honestly, a lot of it is mostly around. I've had different death experience, but the one like you're talking about with Raven Moon is probably the most significant because literally everything you just said, I have a direct corollary to that. In that, I also met Raven Moon at a period of time when he was already fully advanced. I did not get the chance to meet him before he was sick,
Right.
but he was already progressing. He was already struggling. But this is before he was in hospice, and we were at a convention, and I was going through the grief process of a divorce
Right.
and really trying to figure out my life, what I was being, who I wanted to be. Had just come back from a class or from a ritual or something, and I was just emotionally kind of vibrating in a bad place. And I just kind of sat in the sunlight streaming in the window on the balcony. I just kind of sat on the floor in the sunlight and was just kind of like trying to ground and center myself. And he just, again, not knowing who I was, came over and just like held my hand through it. And then we had some conversations, and he was an amazing person. And that moment while he was still alive changed my life and forged a connection from me to him. Even with this stranger, he was just so incredibly welcoming and opening, and just that connection there. And then he passed. And then several years later, so this is after the hospice, after you receive this message, I was at Burning Man sitting in the temple. And every time he was also, I know he went to Burning Man a lot. So there was this connection. It was a place that I had never been, but I had wanted to go for so long. And I was there my second time around. And one of the things that I knew is he was a burner. So I would go to the temple and I would place an item or say something and honor him there. And I was just kind of sitting in the temple in the evening, just sitting there. I was just quiet, kind of I had my eyes closed and kind of hands on my lap, kind of in a meditative state, just kind of taking in the energy and everything around me. And I opened my eyes because I feel something. I feel a presence, and I open my eyes and I look up, and there's this young man walking towards me. And he was tall, he was very dark complected, had very dark hair. It, in a lot of ways, looked like a younger Raven Moon from the pictures and stuff that I had seen. Didn't know this person. He walked over, grabbed my hands, held them for a moment, kissed the back of my hands, and then walked away. And I never saw him again. And this was just a complete stranger in that moment, but I have no doubt that
That it was Raven Moon.
that it was Raven Moon coming through and again saying, I see you. Thank you. I acknowledge you. I am here to be a spirit and to be a guide for you, even though we met through a moment of shared grief and a moment of shared trauma, and that we were in different stages and different places. Our grief, where our grief was centered, was different, but that connection of grief, and that
Commonality.
connection of coming through that and sharing that, I think forged a really deep connection. And it's intense. It's a really intense experience when things like that happen. So there is a magic in that. It is something that you can see in little ways. If you've had
I,
dreams about parents who've passed, or friends, or things coming back, there's a
I
magic in that.
I learned to not see death as a complete severance or an utter ending, and to be in relationship with grief and death from
Mm-hmm.
losing my father.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting that you brought up losing yours. I reached a point where like I've lived longer without my dad than I've
Mm-hmm.
had him alive, which unfortunately for you, of course, you reached that point a lot earlier than I did. So I did have my father around for 20 years, but now it's been longer than that since he's been gone. But he is definitely one of those spirits. We didn't, not like with the Raven Moon where we kind of talked about it beforehand, but I feel like when he is around, he's still very much lets me know. He talks to me in my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And in my sleep, I've had conversations with him like, you can't be here. You were dead. Like, didn't we bury you? Except we didn't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I still have his ashes. So, of course, he visits. But in my dreams, I'll be like, didn't we, like, how can you still be here? And like, mom got remarried. Does that mean she's now like not legal? And now, of course, my mom's passed on. So, but I definitely feel like, some people who aren't spiritual could say that that's just the memory of them that
Mm-hmm.
you have, the relationship with them that you psychically hold on to. But I personally have always felt that there was this deeper connection of spirit, that the body may die and be returned to earth or turned to ash or dust, but the spirit moves
Mm-hmm.
and
Crosses planes.
revisits and is boundless and free, and may still feel attached to people on earth or places on the earth. Some people do or don't believe in ghosts and hauntings, and I don't get so caught up in it that it freaks me out or frightens me
Mm-hmm.
or impedes my way of moving through this world. But I also don't deny the existence of things that we can't know on a physical level.
Mm-hmm.
I think spirits do visit.
Mm-hmm. And changing topics a little bit, but it kind of is the same thing, is because if we have messages in our dreams, if we have that idea that spirit does speak to you, in multiple different ways and different forms, what are some of the ways that we can listen? What are some of the ways that we can do grief magic that will open us up to that idea of a visitation, or that idea of working with that spiritual energy?
So, what do we actively do to be in relationship with the magic of grief?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I feel like, in my experience, when I saw my grandma dying, I feel like she could see some of her ancestors, her siblings that had passed a long time ago, come to collect her,
Mm-hmm.
visiting. She saw people like my wife and thought that she was somebody else that had long since been gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that experience, I take away that when we're in these deep moments of transition, whether it's death, somebody died, people on the other side also gather and visit. I experienced this when I brought my babies home from the hospital. I feel like my ancestors visited, and I think spirits like energy, and if they don't get it gifted to them in one way, shape, or form, they'll take what they can get. And I think energy is so we had a lot of tech go kind of
Mm-hmm.
sideways, and that tends like energy tech takes energy, and the spirits will visit and they'll feed off the energy wherever they can get it. So I personally got into a practice of during Samhain, during moments of celebrating the passing of someone or the anniversary of their passing, or initially I know different people sit for different periods of time during, as their traditional grief processing, but I light candles to
Mm-hmm.
feed the spirits that may be visiting, those that have just left, but also those that have come to welcome them in or to help the family transition. And if you don't offer the energy up in maybe shape of flame candle, I know that you can make offerings of other things.
I was just going to say with candles, it's one of those things that it's this probably the simplest thing that we do without recognizing or realizing that it's a magical practice. Because lighting a candle for the dead is across every single spiritual practice has
Right.
some form of lighting and holding candles, holding vigil of that kind of thing. So that is, it's working with transition. It's again, it feeds the energy of the spirit. It lights the guide. Also, the idea of lighting the way home in remembrance, all of that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's idea of grief magic and death magic. Lighting a candle is
Yeah.
probably the very first easy thing
Yeah.
that you can do when you're talking about grief magic. It can be a lot of that's it's step one. It's step one, the easiest thing. It does not have to be a fancy candle. It doesn't have to be a specific ritualistic candle. Any
Nope.
candle that you can, again, with intent, light the idea and light the way for that grief magic. And
Yeah.
again, you can do so much with it.
Yeah, the spark of life, I often approach death and grief with the idea that when somebody you love dies, a part of you dies with them, and a part of them lives with you, lives
Hmm.
on in you, or lives in their memory lives on in you. And so there's that exchange, and I feel like the candle can be a representation of how that exchange,
Hmm.
feeds that energy. It can be
Hmm.
a focal point. There are other ways that you can kind of, the other traditions have honored the dead.
Hmm.
I know for like a first Thanksgiving without a very important loved one, part of the family, people will still make a plate for their loved ones,
Hmm.
or, any holiday really, especially but a holiday where, a meal is shared.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can make a plate offering table for the ancestors.
Hmm.
I think that weddings often include ancestry tables so that and in the ceremonies, a lot of times people want to honor those who can't be with us
Hmm.
but are still there in spirit. Sometimes I've seen like chairs be reserved for people, even though they're not able to come.
An empty seat at the table left
Yeah,
for the guest. Also, in ways too, if you know that you have someone who has recently passed and a holiday is coming up, or a wheel of the time, a
significant.
pagan holiday, or anything along those lines, there's also think about ways you can incorporate a reverence or reminder for them in it. What was their favorite food? If you're coming up on something on one of the holy days that focus around food, what was their favorite food? Incorporate that into your meal. Something that recognizes them. If they have a particular spot they love to go to, take a drive by, go out and sit in that spot and have a meditation in that moment with them, and just kind of be with them. Think about what you do, how they've been, how they relate to you, what those happy times, those sad times, all of those different bits and moments that you can find where you feel connected in a place to someone.
And if you're so inclined, if you feel like you're the type of person that is in tuned in that sort of way, you can open yourself up to receiving signs or messages.
Hmm.
You can ask for a sign that you're with me. Sometimes you don't get it, but sometimes you do.
Hmm.
You can ask for a message and pull some cards.
Hmm.
That's how we get sassed by Raven Moon quite often.
The entire funeral process is grief magic.
Right. It's a ceremony.
Exactly.
It's a ritual.
Hmm.
It's a tradition. Much like with weddings and births, it can be what you want it to be. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
dictated by tradition, but you can incorporate tradition. Again, there are so many, I don't know if necessarily pagan paths, but there's also very non-pagan traditions that also have a lot of cool things around death and dying and honoring the dead. So I know we have the Disney movie that taught us about Dia de los Muertos, right?
Hmm.
As a Californian, I've seen the imagery of it
Hmm.
for my whole life because we have a beautiful community of who celebrate of Hispanic heritage who celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and being just learning about other cultures and their approaches to
Hmm.
honoring ancestors and inviting in those who are I think the magic is in so many aspects. That magic is in so many aspects of so many people's lives. And it doesn't matter what the approach is, what the tradition is, how you celebrate. Some people want a funeral, some people want a party,
Mm-hmm.
Some people like say, don't cry for me when I'm gone. I just want you to celebrate. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no wrong way of dealing with grief,
Mm-mm. And
but it
sometimes,
is sacred
mhm,
and it is magical and it's not for us to turn away from.
no. And it's not for us to forget that in that grief, it's an emotion, it's an energy, and you can use that energy to work magic and work connection magic, especially when you're talking about spiritual guides, spiritual ancestors, the connection realm for a lot of things. Or if you're talking, again, if you're talking about grief and say the loss of a relationship, you can use that energy towards cutting and clearing. You can
Yeah.
use that energy towards starting afresh, starting anew. You can use that energy in so many ways because it's not good or bad. It just is, and it just needs to
Yeah.
be directed.
Yeah.
But
A
grief
lot of
magic
times
is, it's
you can
really
take
incredibly
it.
powerful.
A lot of times when you're going through a breakup like that, the energy that you once dedicated to this other person now becomes yours to dedicate to yourself or
Hmm.
something you haven't had time for prior because of this relationship and all the time you put into it. And when that goes, there's a way to fill that energy,
Hmm.
that shifting of energies. I like to think of it as the opportunity to date yourself,
Right.
take care of yourself, meet your needs, however that manifests. But, having that kind of energy that you once dedicated to one thing in life, suddenly freed up, it means that you can dedicate time and energy to yourself.
Hmm.
And that's never a bad thing.
No, because when you become who you are and you step into your authenticity, that is where your power grows.
And there will always be more people who love you.
Hmm.
There will always be more love in the world, despite the messages we get.
Right.
And again, I just bring back love because I think we grieve because we love.
Hmm.
I think relationship breakups are hard because of the vulnerability of loving somebody
Hmm.
through better or worse.
And especially when you're dealing with anger, when you're dealing with things. But I want to kind of pull us back to the idea of how and what to do rather than kind of just the ideas around it. So, one of the other things that we can think about when you're talking about what can we do? Practical steps for a practical witch, right? What can you do to work the grief magic, to work what you're doing, and how do you find that connection? And some of that can be thinking and learning about some of the different archetypes and deities that also deal with the dead, that work in that realm of death and grief and dying, and what are those different entities, and seek their guidance, seek their messages, and see if there's anything that you can work with them on to help you understand the path where you are at. See if they have any knowledge or guidance that they're willing to give you.
Especially if, beyond the death of a person, if you're
Hmm.
dealing with grief over the loss of something and you kind of feel stuck in your grief and you can't move on,
Hmm.
whether it's a job or a relationship or a house or whatever it is that you lost, a car in an
Hmm.
accident or something like that. I think as a pagan, as a
Hmm.
witchy folk, finding our relationship with the deities who deal with death, the dying, the dead, that is a good source of connection and power and soul growth,
Hmm.
if you turn to that spirit and ask for help processing, letting go.
Hmm.
It's not just a Disney song.
No. And it's really the idea of being able to seek guidance from those entities that this is their domain. It's your learning from the person who knows. You're learning from the best teacher.
Yeah.
When you're talking about that kind of connection. And every spiritual path that you follow will have a different god of death.
Mhm.
There will be other gods that are related to death and dying, and they may not be the same thing. We think of Hades, everyone says Hades is the god of the dead. And yes, he's the god of the dead, but he's not the god of death. So he's the lord of the underworld that sees over those who have passed on, but the god of death is Thanatos. And he's that being that brings from that transition from the point of life to death. So there's a lot of different things. There's so many stories and mythologies.
From so many
Hell,
different traditions. Hell
yeah.
in
And that's with
that
one
would
L,
be Hell
Hel.
with one L, who I believe is a daughter of Loki.
Hmm. Or I think Odin. I think it's the daughter of Odin. I'm not sure. My Norse mythology, I will fully admit, is wrong, and I do
Okay.
not know.
I'm not firsthand knowledge either, but I feel like I've seen something about it recently. I think in the like Egyptian pantheon, I think of Anubis as the god
Hmm.
of death. I also think of their spiritual storytelling around the feather and the heart being weighed and,
Hmm.
feeding whatever to a moot who eats the dead. But I always
Hmm.
think of that as like the physical part that we leave behind and releasing the spirit into the afterlife. Some
Hmm.
people do or don't believe in an afterlife.
Hmm.
Some people believe in that we live multiple lives
Right.
and that we just, our spirit goes to recycle. So yeah, I love getting in touch with different traditions. What are other deities that we think of when we're
I think of in Celtic traditions, you've got the Morrigan, covers a lot of different topics. And a lot of gods and goddesses will cover a lot of different paths, but the
and
Morrigan
there are
is
so
definitely
many more
one.
that we don't know.
Yes. And speaking of North, I think of Odin more in the nature of being guides. I think of the Valkyries who lead fallen soldiers to Valhalla. And I can't remember what for Odin, but I cannot remember the name of the same for Freya. There's the path to Valhalla, and there's the path to another, and there are guides that do the
Right.
same for that.
Right, because some traditions have this idea that there's more than one place that you can go
Go to
depending
for Affleck.
on what the life that you lived.
Hmm.
Different afterlives depending on who
Yes.
we worshiped or what paths we took.
Hmm.
There are spiritual traditions that don't believe in living for an afterlife,
Hmm.
that we need to be living for the life that we have in front of us right now.
Exactly. So
So
there's lots of
there's
different
so many different
paths and
approaches.
things that look at it, but that's again one way to deal with the idea of finding a guide, finding
Yeah.
someone to look at guidance to help you along a path, to give you more information, to give you comfort, but also knowledge. I know you wanted to talk about checking in.
I think that when a loved one passes, I think a lot of ancestors gather, but I also think that they check in on us. If they just randomly cross your mind,
Hmm.
or a song comes on and it's like they're speaking to you, you can then check in with them as well. But I also think of it as sometimes you're calling them back from wherever they reside in the spirit world. Some people, I think, maybe feel like they move on at
Hmm.
some point. How do you feel about like exorcism or trying to get ghosts to move on?
I believe there is evil, whether it has a name or a presence or a thing. Evil is a real thing. And there are points where evil has trapped entities, spirits,
Mm,
things, and there are spirits and entities that may be lost or wandering. Maybe that didn't have a connection to find their way past. And when it is sent into the idea of exorcism being to assist someone along the path into the next plane for someone who is lost,
or
or
stuck?
stuck or something along those lines. That is what I see exorcism as, not the Catholic upbringing of outcast demons, because I don't believe demons are possessive entities. But I do believe that it is very, very possible to get stuck, because you can get stuck in your magic, you can get stuck on a plateau, and any kind of journey that you're making, you can just find yourself stuck and you don't know what to do, you don't know where to go, you don't know where to turn, and you're just confused. And I think that's very possible that it could happen to the spirit world too. And so finding some way to help those pass on into the next plane, into the next state of existence is important.
I also think it on the flip side, not to be contrary, but sometimes not pushing a spirit out that is perfectly happy to live where it's at or to continue visiting.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's like free will for all,
Hmm.
including the spirits.
Yeah,
It depends on what the task at hand is calling for. Discernment, for sure. But yeah, I feel like when our loved ones pass, I think that they check in a lot
Mm-hmm.
early on and, want to make sure that we're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
They want us out here living our best life. Maybe sometimes they're still experiencing life through us
Mm-hmm.
when they check in. They can't experience the pleasures of whatever made them happy in life, but they can see us doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe sometimes they do move on, and maybe that checking in dwindles a little bit. And I don't think you ever have to feel guilty if that happens. And I think the connection can be just as strong 20 years from now as it was when it was fresh. It just tends to come less frequently.
I don't believe in a linear sense of time on the other side.
Right.
So
Yeah.
on this side of the
Sure.
veil, we would experience check-ins as frequent or non-frequent, but on the other side of the veil, they could be eons or seconds apart and we wouldn't know. So I think for me, it's less about, I think in that case, on this mortal realm, we are holding on to that idea of spirit
Yeah.
checking in on us more than the spirits need to check in on us, because the spirit has infinite need to be able to do that on the other side. Where I was referring to those spirits I think are stuck tend to be who don't have, for some other reason, unable to get where they want to go. And that's where the idea of helping them along their way to get to where they want to go and where they're trying to get to is a thing, not necessarily we're holding them on, or if they want to be there, then by all means don't kick them out, but they want to get somewhere but they can't, and that's the idea of helping along, that though I do hate the word exorcism.
Right. I just brought that up because I was curious as to, I've seen that used as an excuse to abuse
Mm-mm.
people, like
Yeah,
trying to pray the gay away.
right. And like I said, that's again that idea of this is something you are trying to cast out what you are feeling as a demon, and that I do not believe in.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to say about checking in is when you know people who are in grief, who have experienced a deep loss, a significant loss of some way, shape, or form,
Mm-hmm.
early on in their grief journey, everybody's there with their condolences, dropping off food. And early on, when people are experiencing deep grief, sudden loss, or a significant loss, they don't always start off, like you said, it's non-linear, right? Sometimes it's like you go numb
Mm-hmm.
because you have to get shit done.
Mm-hmm.
You have to deal with paperwork. You have to figure out what you're going to do with the funeral and wills and arrangements, and things change and families fight. Like the gamut of emotions come
Mm-hmm.
through, but there's a lot of activity
Mm-hmm.
early on, and then that goes away. And I've seen this happen over and over. It happened with my mom when my dad passed away. It's happened with other people when they've experienced, like for them, because the grief is so close, the loss is so significant, it stays for them, but like the activity, the need to handle things goes away, and the people checking in on them tends to go away. So if you love somebody who has experienced a deep loss, make sure you're checking in on them when those anniversaries come up, when those first holidays or birthdays or celebrations that they would have with their person that they can no longer celebrate
Mm-hmm.
with, when those come up, make sure you're doing your little check-ins on those loved ones. If you know somebody in grief and you
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to help them, my suggestion is to find moments of checking in on them after the dust has settled. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's when the loneliness starts to set in.
Mm-hmm.
That's when grief can get really heavy for someone and the helpers have kind of dissipated. So I think my secret magic is to make mental notes that I need to check in on this friend at this point because I know that their grief is going to pop off on this anniversary, and they may
Mm-hmm.
not want to say anything, but they
Mm-hmm.
may need just that little extra push of like, I'm here for you. I acknowledge your loss. I still
Mm-hmm.
remember. If you have feelings you want to talk about, I care. I think checking in on loved ones who are in grief
Mm-hmm.
is a service to your community and a magic in and of itself.
That's a good, really, really good point. And I would say for those of you, what can we do to hold space for others, but when you are in that middle of the grief? when you are in that stage of loneliness, when you are in that stage where you don't know what to do? What are some of those things that you can do while you are the one in the middle of that stage and you need the support, knowing that you'll offer the support to someone else when they're in that stage? Because at some point in time, you will also be in that stage of grief.
I don't know. I mean, self advocating says you ask for the help that you need.
Hmm.
But I think grief and depression go hand in hand sometimes, where you get stymied or overwhelmed, or you have no energy because you're just so sad. And I remember sleeping a lot
Hmm.
when my dad died. Like I was like, I can't be awake, because if I'm awake, I have feelings and I don't have any way to deal with these feelings in a healthy outlet. I was very young when this happened, barely an adult. And so I slept.
Hmm.
That was my depression. That was so, like, I think that advocating for yourself when you're deep in that grief is very hard,
Hmm.
but best case scenario, you're able to ask for the help that you need.
Hmm. I think it's one of those things that when you're in it and you're acknowledging that all you can do are these things, it's important to remind yourself that there are still some basic things that you have to do for yourself. You have to eat, you
Right.
have to drink water, you have to rest, you need to take a
Those things
shower.
are can be so hard to do when you're deep in grief.
When you're deep in grief, when you're deep in depression,
Yeah.
anything else, it's incredibly hard to remember. So you put a sticky note on your thing. Have I eaten today? Have I taken a shower today? Have I rested? And again, we've talked about lots of different struggle meals and different ways of dealing when you're in that kind of thing in various podcasts. It doesn't have to be a fancy meal. You can grab a stick of cheese. You can put together and grab a handful of crackers, a fistful of salami, a spoonful of peanut butter. It doesn't have to be
Deconstructed
fancy.
sandwiches.
Deconstructed sandwiches, all of those things, it's okay. But you have to remember that the only way you can get through this is by processing. And you got to eat, you got to drink, you got to shower, you got to rest.
The other thing that you can do is cry.
Mm-hmm.
Is I know sometimes you're just tired of crying, but crying is cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
It is a physical representation of a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes it from the realm of idea of feeling to the physically
Mm-hmm.
processing it out. And if you are numb and you can't cry, sometimes you can kind of, and you just know that, like, I just know a good cry would fix this mood I'm in. You can invoke crying sometimes, maybe with for me, it would be with music. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Everybody's path is different. Maybe with a novel that is a sad story but is beautiful and you love it and it's familiar, or a movie, something that will help trigger the release of the emotions that are building up.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's also okay to say, I can't deal with this right now. I need a distraction.
True. Yeah.
So sometimes it's a band-aid, doesn't heal it, but sometimes the best thing for you is to get out and get away from it. So sometimes the best thing is to go back to work if you
Right.
enjoy what you're doing, or go for a drive, or start a new project, or anything else. And I had this recently with a coworker of mine. I walked in, I said, "How are you doing?" She's like, my father passed away. I'm all, "My God, why are you here?" She's like, "I need the distraction. There's
Yeah.
so much going on right now. This is quieter, this is calmer. I'm with my teams that I know will support me and do all of these things." So if you have that ability to do something, that you can do too. It's like everything, all of this is in moderation. You take it to an extreme, you're not doing anything right. But those little baby steps, all those little things. So, like you said, it's okay to start crying. It's okay to decide, I can't deal with this right now. I'm going to focus on something else and give my attention to that, because it will re-trigger something else in your brain.
Yep. And if you need to set that boundary with people of, like, let's not talk about this because I can't cry anymore
Right.
because my eyes are raw, that's okay
Exactly.
too. Again, I think when we are in grief, it is more challenging to advocate for ourselves, but you are allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I have taught many people that I am shameless, if it comes down to it, shameless, I tell you, about playing the grief card, as in, if you are in deep grief and your normal state of mind, your nervous system is going through something.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are some high demands on you that you don't want to be dealing with and you don't need to be dealing with right now, and somebody else is trying to make it your problem, you get to say, look, my so and so just died. I'm not dealing with this.
Hmm.
It's important to do that, set that boundary for yourself, because some things are best taken care of when we're not in the midst of
Hmm.
that. Brain fog. Oh my God, so much brain fog with grief.
Hmm. Brain fog, and sometimes there's survivor's guilt.
Right.
That's
And
another
I
one
think
that's
that sometimes is why
really
it's like hard
hard.
to eat and hard to do those things that sustain life when you just don't, you want to go with them. You want to be with them. You didn't want to be left behind.
Or something's tragic happened,
Yes.
and you're trying to process through the trauma of the tragedy as well as the trauma of grief, and all of that kind of thing. And for something like that, you're going to need to talk to someone about it. You need to talk to someone professional about that.
And
There's so much more
are
complicated
there are
than.
resources out there for people who are in grief in general and in that specific kind of grief.
Mhm.
Like, seek out resources. People are here to help.
Yeah. There are so many different
Professionals
support
are,
groups,
yeah,
online groups, therapy, but all of this kind of thing is incredibly important. So having the conversations, and you have that conversation with your deity, you can have that conversation with your priest or your priestess, you can have that conversation with your spiritual advisor, you can have it with a
family or
trusted
friends.
friend, a family, all of that, however you need to do so.
But talk.
But that moment, or again, say, I just need to be and sit in silence. I just need to
Yeah.
be in space. So advocating for yourself while you're in the middle of it is also, like you said, incredibly important. But also remember that you are in charge of this electric meat sack. So you do have
Yeah.
to still take care of yourself in the
Yep.
middle of it.
Yep. That can be the challenge, but it is literally a part of the cycle of life and
Hmm.
death.
Exactly.
And I think we can both speak on it because we've both
Hmm.
been in the midst of it
Absolutely.
in our
On so
lives.
many
And I
different
think
levels.
if anybody's lived long enough, they will have on some level be able to relate to that.
Hmm. And I don't think this is something that you should also keep from kids. Kids are also going to experience grief, and they're going to experience grief in a radically different way than adults are.
Right.
So
And at
hold
different stages
space.
depending on
Yeah. Hold
their age and
space.
their understanding.
Hold space for them as well.
Yeah.
And they will have their own kind of magic. They will have their own kind of path to deal with grief. I encourage and support parents who help them through that processing in their own way.
Yep. And also, never make it a taboo topic for
Mm-mm.
them. And it doesn't matter how long it's been. Like, if you lost a parent when you were 8 years old, when you're 14, you're going to have fresh feelings about it
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't process when you were 8, 9, or 10.
Mm-mm.
When you're
Like,
25 and getting married and they're not there for whatever reason, you're going to have fresh feelings about it.
mm-hmm.
So it's
Like
okay
I
to
said,
talk about it, no
it's
matter how
okay.
long it's been.
There's no timeline on it. Again, using another example, I said my father passed away when I was 4. Um, and there was a lot of trauma and tragedy around that and everything else. And my mom didn't talk about him a lot growing up. And I didn't question, I didn't ask. But it was literally less than 6 months ago, we had a conversation, and she's like, I wish I had talked about your dad more. And
Mm,
I told her, I'm going, I know that you did what you needed for your own healing and ours. I want to know more about why you fell in love with him. Not today, but at some point. I know the stories around it. I know the stories of what happened. I know the stories of everything around the circumstances and around you and me and all of the other things. I'm still 40 plus years later, not ready, was not quite ready in that moment to hear it, but I know that I will be. So there is no timeline
no timeline.
when it comes to talking through and processing grief. But at the same time, I'm now ready. I'm now ready to hear and listen without anger, without frustration, without anything else. And it was a really good conversation. And even knowing that conversation hadn't concluded, even where we got to it was a really good conversation of things that I had processed about mental health and struggles and suicide
Mm.
and all the other things throughout the courses of the years. So it's one of those things. But we have talked a lot
Yeah.
about this.
And I think we've more than covered a very deep topic
Hmm.
and only scratched the surface.
Right.
So, if you stayed around for all of that, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you like what you hear, Make sure you give us some thumbs up and 5 stars or 10 stars or however many stars you let us get, they let you give us, because we appreciate your feedback.
I also hope you have a happy Samhain. But in the meantime, if there's a topic you want to know more about or an episode topic you'd like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on TikTok, Instagram with a handle at queerwitchproject. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously.
Yes. Bye.